Oh, good morning. I think I'm in the corner now. There I am. Oh, welcome back. It's Monday. It's 9 o'clock here on the West Coast. It's noon on the East, and this is Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. Thank you very much for joining the party this morning. See, the white balance is off a little bit this morning, but, that's just part of the teething problems that is my entire life. I'd like to welcome you to Backchannel. If it's your first time, then it's very easy to be involved. You just chat to your device. If you've got an Echo Show, then it's super easy. Just say the word, whatever the wake-up word is, Echo, or, I don't know, whatever you've got written down as your wake-up word. Some people use the default word, the female name. Some people have changed it to something completely different. I always wanted to change mine to Jeff, because I always felt that in some way I was summoning up Jeff Bezos to do all of the work for me. What's the time, Jeff? Set me a timer, Jeff. How far is it to Cleveland, Jeff? Like all of this stuff that I could potentially do with him. But apparently you can't change it to Jeff. So I'm sticking with, her indoors. Say your wake-up word, followed by say, and then your message, and then that will enable you to communicate with me right here on Backchannel. It's Monday morning. We've had a weekend off. We had a Thanksgiving extended weekend, a lot of people traveling, and we're back. We are back. I'm actually traveling myself in just 2 hours. The moment I finish this show, I then have another 2 hours to be on a flight, and I'm cutting it quite fine. So I'm at 11 a.m. Pacific. The car's ready. I'd say the engine is currently running, but my car doesn't have an engine. Everything's packed. I'm in the car. I'm off to LAX, and I'm flying to Cleveland via Minneapolis. But the flight is at 8 minutes past 1, and 11, and I'm leaving here at just after 11. So it's going to be tight because it's like 40 minutes to the airport, and that leaves me like an hour and 20 before the flight leaves. So, there's a lot in it. But I know, you see, the thing is, I'm so used to traveling internationally, I don't really fly domestically. And internationally, these days, they encourage you to get there 3 hours before the flight. Well, domestically, it's a slightly different story. So they say, the latest you can be there is like 30 minutes before your flight. So I think I'm going to be fine. But I like to add a little bit of jeopardy and drama to an otherwise non-existent story. Thomas, good morning. Thank you for joining us here on Backchannel. I'm Anthony. You are Thomas. Let me know where you are. Let me know maybe you're traveling. Maybe you just come back from your Thanksgiving weekend. We're going to look through some of the biggest stories making the headlines this morning. We're going to talk about the Omicron variant of coronavirus. What does it mean? Do you have to get another vaccine? Do you have to, where can you travel? We're going to look at all the facts behind Omicron and explain, well, it's hard because obviously this thing's pretty new. And I know Biden's going to be talking about it later, but I'm hoping that there won't be any border closures because... or even state closures. I don't want to get stuck in Cleveland. But more importantly, my whole family are coming to Los Angeles for Christmas from Europe. And, they're booked to come in a couple of weeks' time. So I've moved my mum's flight. She's now coming on the 4th of December. Hopefully, in case they do make any border closures, she can, skip in before it happens. I don't know why I'm telling you this. I know it's not your problem. I just feel the need to share. This is like a kind of psychotherapy session, really, where you don't pay, I get paid, and everybody's happy. Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey is to resign. We'll be looking at that. I don't know if it's going to make any difference to Twitter because the toothpaste is already out of the proverbial tube. We're also going to talk about Ghislaine Maxwell. Her sex trafficking trial has begun today in New York City. Of course, the sidekick / accomplice to Jeffrey Epstein, who died mysteriously in a New York prison. And then finally taking a look at the barrier-breaking American black designer Virgil Abloh, who rose to dizzying heights in the fashion industry and has sadly passed away. So, lots to talk about. Stacey, good morning or good afternoon where you are in Texas. Thank you for joining Backchannel this morning. It's me, it's you, it's Thomas. Carla's here. We're already bursting at the seams. We're gonna have to get a bigger box. Let's be honest. We have to get a bigger box. So let's just dive straight into the morning newspapers because that's what we tend to do first. We tend to take a look, see what's happening, do a little analysis, and then, move on a little wiser and a little older. So they lead with a variant spreads further around the globe. It says facing a global spread of the Omicron coronavirus variant, US health officials said it would probably take 2 weeks to fully determine the level of threat, but pushed booster shots as a key first stage in the battle. Yeah, I got my booster a couple of weeks ago, so I'm now feeling like I'm best prepared to travel across the US in aeroplanes. I think had I not have had my booster, I might have been like, oh, new variant, do I really want to travel? But I feel pretty safe. And I'm going to be, I've got a full head mask. I'm wearing a Darth Vader mask on the plane. President Biden met with top health advisors on Sunday to map out a strategy as new cases were confirmed in more countries, including Germany, Italy, Belgium, Israel, and Hong Kong. In Amsterdam, 13 people on flights from South Africa, where the region Omicron is believed to have originated. 13 people tested positive there. In England, officials imposed stricter mask rules in response to the discovery of 2 cases. Stacey says, Anthony, I can't stay long. I have Bible study at 11:30. All right, well, it's 11:30. 10. Oh, you're 2 hours ahead, 11:30. Okay, well, that's fine. I'm prepared to make an exception on this day, but please get a note from your mum next time. And say a little prayer for me when I'm on the flight. So the UK has imposed these mask mandates, and everyone's going nuts for it over there. In fact, there was a hashtag floating around Twitter, something along the lines of "Do not comply." What is it with people? What is it with people? I mean, that, unfortunately, is the effect of having a joke leader. If you vote for a clown to run your country, then when it comes to him needing to say something serious, no one's going to pay any attention because he has no credence or credibility. He's just a bit of a fool. And Stacey says because people just don't care. You're right, people don't care. I mean, there is a theory. Some people have a theory that they just don't believe in coronavirus. Like they just think the whole thing is made up. And they're living their lives in this parallel universe where to them it's like it's just a different existence. Some kind of subplot to reality. And I just think, wow, how many people need to die before you guys are going to wake up and realize that this is a thing? And they've got so many excuses for like the numbers of people did. Oh, those people would have died anyway. These people had underlying health conditions. It's like, no, you haven't looked at the data. All you've done is watched your propaganda TV channel and just like taken that as read. Look at this. Look at the science. So when my racist landlord sends me links about these things, I always send him back a link, but it's always a peer-reviewed study that I send him, like the actual data. Not from a news organization, news in inverted commas, just the peer-reviewed data I send him. And I'm like, read the data. Not somebody's opinion. Just read the data. Fauci said the government said the winter COVID-19 surge is possible. Vaccinations are the best way to combat it. He said if we had a combination of getting as many people as we can to be vaccinated who've not yet gotten vaccinated, add on to it the children who are now eligible, the 5 to 11s, there's 28 million of those. If we do that successfully in a very intensive way, we can mitigate any increase, he said. I mean, I think this is what Biden's going to do. He's going to use Omicron as an opportunity to get the rest of the people who weren't vaccinated. But you know what the problem with that is? What comes with that in this parallel universe is the people who think that the whole thing is a government conspiracy will be like, yeah, so you invented Omicron, given it a crazy name, to try and convince us to be vaccinated. Well, we're not that stupid. That's what they're going to say. I know it. That's what they're going to say. I can hear it playing out on Fox News right now. I actually saw a clip from Fox News the other day where they were like, the Democrats keep inventing these new variants. They said it out loud. 3 hosts corroborating it with each other on the couch. The Democrats, they've invented these new variants. And I was like, whoa. They're not even hiding it now. If you've lost a family member and you've watched that, I wonder how that makes you feel. To think that there's the most watched news show in the whole of America. More people watch Fox, about 3 million a week, but more people watch Fox than any other news channel. People don't really watch news here. It's not popular. More people watch late night talk shows, and that's why the monologue from the likes of, Fallon and Kimmel and any of the, I was gonna say Johnny Carson, but I think he might have retired. That's why the monologues have become like the big moment, the news moment of the night, rather than watching what used to be the 10 o'clock news or the 11 o'clock news. Just watch the late night talk hosts and see what they have to say about it. Again, more opinion. Interest in booster shots has been more sluggish than officials had expected, Fauci said. That must change. We feel, even with variants like Omicron, that if you get boosted, you're going to get a level of antibody that's high enough that it's likely you'll be able to get at least some degree and maybe even a lot of protection against this. I mean, here's my theory, okay? An inoculation, an immunization, a shot, especially a booster, which is a low dose, it's just not the huge thing that some people make it out to be. It's just, some people have got it into their head that having an inoculation is like some reprogramming of your body. And the reality is it's just like it's nothing. It's literally nothing. Do you know how much mass there is, how much water and how much smush there is inside your body? A tiny little vial that wears off over time. Trust me, it's so minimal. It's a tiny little thing that is just telling your body how to behave when certain enemies try and attack it. But some people have converted this idea of the contents of a vial for an inoculation into being some kind of death liquid. And it's like, what are you talking about? How did this become like, how were shots weaponized like this? I mean, when I was younger in England, there are still people that campaign against the combined MMR jab, which is measles, mumps, and rubella. And some mums have got a whole campaign going about they do not want their children vaccinated against measles, mumps, and rubella. Well, measles used to be was an epidemic, and they managed to deal with it with inoculation. So there's no measles now anywhere in the world. People do not get measles. And it used to be terrible. When I was a kid, people were getting measles because they didn't have a vaccine. And then in the early 80s, I think it was, they came up with a measles vaccine. Mid-80s, maybe. Came up with a measles vaccine. I mean, what do you want to say about, like, penicillin? Well, you're going to go through life without penicillin? What do you think that's doing to your body? Modern medicine, Western medicine, is incredible. It's incredible. But it doesn't stay in you forever. Penicillin doesn't stay in you forever. You take the course, you might take 10 days. And, penicillin saved my life twice. Like, saved my life. Like, I was literally gonna die. I had a thing called a peritonsillar abscess called a quinsy. Very rare, very, very rare, quinsy. Quinzy. And it used to kill people by the thousands because the abscess would grow in the throat and you couldn't breathe and you'd die of suffocation. And of course I was admitted to hospital. I was given intravenous penicillin and it reduced the swelling and I was able to live. Now, if I was a skeptic about penicillin, I'd have been like, no, I'm all right, thanks. I'll just use my natural immunity. That's the new thing they're talking about now. Natural immunity. And natural immunity is fine for, like, fighting off a little cold. It's not designed for deadly viruses. Natural immunity. Yeah, some people will be naturally able to fight it off, but they're not going to be naturally immune. No one is immune to coronavirus. You'll get it. You might not know because you'll be asymptomatic, or you'll get it a little bit. And if you have a vaccine, it's going to prevent you from going to hospital. And if they have had a vaccine from the very beginning, then the 2 million people that have died around the world would not be dead. They just wouldn't be. It's as simple as that. Because all those people died because they were unvaccinated, because the vaccine hadn't been invented, or they had chosen not to take it once it had. Only in America is this whole concept of like the vaccine being bad or being some kind of thing that is bad for you, bad for your freedom or bad for your health. Only here has that become a thing. If it hadn't have started here, it wouldn't have spread to Brazil as a conspiracy theory. And wouldn't have spread across the rest of the world as a conspiracy theory. It started here. The timing of it, you know? Also on the front of the LA Times this morning, it says here, for Oroville Vice Mayor Scott Thompson, the father of 2 young boys, Governor Gavin Newsom's mandate requiring school children to be vaccinated against COVID-19 was the final straw. He believed the government had no right to tell him what to put into his children's bodies. Many of his constituents agreed when it came to pandemic mandates. And so he came up with a grandiose, headline-grabbing nom de guerre for his small Northern California city. Oroville declared itself a constitutional republic, a place where the local leaders pledged to fight mandates as they say go too far. It says any executive orders issued by the state of California or by the United States federal government that are overreaching or clearly violate our constitutionally protected rights will not be enforced by the city of Oroville against its citizens. Read the declaration passed this month by the city council. The desire here is dialogue, Thompson said. For some, the declaration was a stand for freedom, but others in town saw it as a reckless tantrum amid a pandemic that has killed more than 73,000 Californians. Butte County, population of around 220,000, has some of the state's lowest vaccination rates. As of Saturday, 47% of its residents were fully vaccinated, compared with 64% of all Californians. Butte County's largest hospital has averaged 26 COVID patients over the last week, more than all but one hospital in Los Angeles, see page 8. It's a shame, because I liked where that was going. I think it's probably about to say that all but one were unvaccinated. I mean, look, this is the quandary that we have now, isn't it? Because I have no doubt that this guy, Mr. Thompson, is a Republican, conservative, right-wing conspiracy theorist. He's not living in reality. And the sad thing is, these people think that they're winning, and they're not, because they have kids. And if their kids get sick, then was it worth the risk? And everybody who has died because of this, families of people who have died, or people who are dying and on their deathbed, they have all said, I was wrong, I wish I'd have taken the vaccine. That's what they say. They interview them all the time. And then they give this new advice to their friends and fellow conspiracy theorists. I wish I had taken the vaccine. It's insane, isn't it? What was that? The conference? Was that the... Oh, that's right. Yes, all those doctors that put a conference together in Florida to make it look like they were being serious. Because, you know, people have this theory that if there's a conference, then it must be true. If there's an overhead projector or, any kind of projection and an audience and people in white coats, that it must be true. It's a bit like Rand Paul, who pretends to be a doctor when he's a dentist. You know? It makes people call him Dr. Rand Paul. It's like, you're an orthodontist, mate. You shouldn't have an opinion about the vaccine that in any way, because, Fauci went for some of these people yesterday because they're still peddling their conspiracy theories, and he just went for them. I finished watching the Fauci documentary on National Geographic via Disney Plus last night. It's such a good documentary, and it made me cry maybe 6 times to think about how Dr. Fauci has given his life to the prevention of HIV and now the prevention of coronavirus. Given his life. The guy's 80 years old. Give him a break. He now needs police protection all the time. And it goes back through his entire history. Talks about him as a kid, and then there's all this archive footage, lovely old film of Dr. Fauci and who he really is, and how the right wing have painted him as this enemy of the people. And actually, he is probably the kindest, most concerned person on the planet. He's given up his life and his family life. His kids don't see him because he is literally on this. He said he hasn't had a good night's sleep since coronavirus started. And yet he is painted as the devil by the right. And my racist landlord the other day, when I was talking about this, he was like, Fauci should be in prison. That's what he said to me. Somebody said this, Fauci was on the stand the other day giving some evidence to Congress. And, oh no, it wasn't Congress. Sorry, he was being interviewed by one of the networks was interviewing him. He was sitting at it looked very official anyway. And they said, what would you say to Rand Paul and Ted Cruz, all these people that are saying that you should be prosecuted? And Fauci laughed and said, what happened on January 6th, senators? You guys answer to that. It's very hard not to be political, isn't it? It's hard for him as a medic and as a scientist not to be political when he is the chief medical advisor and the whole country has half the country has politicized the vaccine and the virus. How do you escape that? I think he's actually walked a very fine line and done very well considering. So when we read stories like defying virus rules as a constitutional republic on the front of the LA Times, and how this vice mayor, Scott Thompson, father of 2 young boys, decides that the town is a constitutional republic and therefore does not have to follow vaccine mandates. At what point do you have to go, okay, this is bad news now? Like you're basically going to start killing people now. People are going to potentially die because of this decision that you've made. Very sad to me that politics seems to be more important than health. Because invariably it's only the poorest people that suffer. The wealthy don't suffer like this. The wealthy are the first people to get tested, the first people to get vaccinated, the first people to kind of be segregated and live a life where they're not coming into contact with others because they can afford to be completely independent and live in a gated community or drive themselves around and not take public transport or work remotely. So, the same thing's going to happen again. The poorest will suffer because of these decisions. Let's go back to the morning papers this morning. The Wall Street Journal is next. I've read some really bad reporting in the Wall Street Journal recently. You find this? Some really weird stuff. The Wall Street Journal's one is still from Friday. Okay, let's go to the New York Times, see if that's a Monday edition. New York Times is Wednesday, the 24th. That's strange. Carla, these links are all old. Wall Street Journal link is Friday. Let me see what else there is here. I'm bouncing to the tunes here. Yeah, New York Times, still Friday. Do they use the same links and repurpose them? Is that the problem? The only Monday I've got is the LA Times. Let me click that Wall Street Journal one again and see what happens. Friday, November 26th, when I click on it. That's so strange. How very, very strange. Let me see if there's another way I can make this work. Okay, I'll do it off the Wall Street Journal's website and see if I can kind of get through it like that for now. So they lead with Dorsey steps down as Twitter CEO. And of course, that's probably a relief for some people. I don't really have an opinion on this, to be honest. I really feel like, Twitter, I said earlier, the toothpaste is already out of the tube. The genie very much is out of the bottle. Do you know what I mean? It's like, the problem with Twitter now isn't Twitter. The problem is the Twitter sphere. The problem is like the people who use Twitter for misinformation or to put an opinion out there that has nothing to do with fact. That's the problem with Twitter. This kind of encouraging misinformation. So Twitter's chief technology officer, his name's Parag Agrawal. He's going to replace Mr. Dorsey as CEO, effective immediately. Oh, I see, it's already done. He's gone. I thought he'd announced that he was going to, It says today that the chief executive, Jack Dorsey, is stepping down, a departure that comes a year after he survived a challenge from activist investors. The Twitter co-founder, one of the most prominent figures in Silicon Valley, is also CEO of digital payments company Squire. His split duties and personal eccentricities have long made him the target of critics, but many employees have hailed him as a stabilizing force within the social media company since he returned to the CEO role in 2015. I mean, a lot of them are kind of weird, these guys, aren't they? Like Dorsey's got this big, long beard and looks like really kind of hippie, which I don't have a problem with, but it's like, you don't associate CEOs with being so cool. Most CEOs kind of look more like Bill Gates, very uncool. And then, of course, you've got Mark Zuckerberg, who just looks like a robot sent from the future with that kind of square-cut hairline. And I suppose Steve Jobs was a bit of a weirdo as well. And the thing is, it's the weirdness that supports their genius. That's why they're able to come up with these genius things like Apple or Twitter or Facebook, is because they think outside the box. The world needs weirdos. I say weirdos with the utmost affection, you understand. And, Silicon Valley, because money talks, Silicon Valley has accepted these people as the originators of tech. I mean, I find the whole thing fascinating, to be honest, but I mean, I'm very interested to know why he's stepping down and whether or not this is going to change anything. I don't think it's going to change anything, personally. I really don't. I really feel like, as I said, the toothpaste is out of the tube. Like, that's it. It's done now. It's just done. Here's Mondays. Okay. I'm back with Mondays. I found it. Restrictions return as Europe combats rise in cases. So that's the headlines. A photograph of an ice rink in Amsterdam closed early on Sunday under new restrictions to prevent the spread of COVID-19. I really hope my mum gets into the country, I really hope she does. I just worry that they'll do something at the border where they'll say, okay, anybody can come in, but only permanent residents or green card holders, and they'll say like tourists can't. But then again, they're thinking about it, and here's my theory. They only just reopened on the 7th of November. They only just reopened the border. And of course, Virgin Atlantic, they announced 90% increase in bookings that day. And so there's going to be all of these people that have booked to come to the US for Christmas to see loved ones that they haven't seen for 2 years. I just don't know that the US government is really going to close the border again. I just don't think it can. But I'm just conscious of not taking that risk, because my mum's going to come earlier on the 4th, but the rest of the family's coming on the 15th. I'm sure they'll be fine, but with my mum, it wasn't worth the risk because she's not been here for 2 years. It's just get her in. Isn't it crazy that all of this stuff now has become so normalized? Locking down countries and closing borders and even having to talk about it. I mean, in my lifetime, this has never been a thing. In my entire lifetime, there has never been a moment where I've worried about a country closing its border. It was bad enough when England left the EU because of Brexit, and suddenly I was like, oh, my European passport will not be valid anymore. How do I travel freely in that area? Like, that's the closest that came to this. Now, and I actually was planning on going to Italy a year and a half ago, and I had to cancel that because, of course, that's where the coronavirus strain was like first prevalent. Do you remember? Italy was in a terrible place. And it kind of spread from there, you know, China to Italy, potentially. Could have been first in Italy. We still don't really know. So we're going to talk about Omicron a little bit later. I heard NPR reporting it as Omicron this morning, and I don't think it's Omicron. I think it's Omicron because it's Greek. So it would be Omicron. It's a Greek alphabet word. Over coffee at his office on Tuesday, Tullio de Oliveira, director of South Africa's Centre for Epidemic Response and Innovation, let a colleague in on a secret. There's something going on, he told Alex Segal, a virologist growing coronaviruses at a South African laboratory. They found a variant they've never seen before. For days, case numbers in the nation have been Case numbers in the nation have been rising rapidly. Puzzled lab technicians have been getting back COVID-19 tests that were positive, but showing an element was missing on the virus's telltale spike protein, potentially signaling that the virus had undergone another change. Scientists sequenced the virus's genome and found more than 50 modifications from the original coronavirus. Wow. On Thursday, the professor delivered the news to South Africa's president. A new variant with potentially worrying characteristics was driving infections in the country. That same day, South Africa's health minister and scientists announced the findings. That's how smart they are now. That's how good we are now. A new variant is detected the very same day the information is shared with every CDC around the world. You know, we should be very grateful. And that's why the kind of anti-COVID brigade upset me so much, because it's like, do you realize how many people are devoting their lives to keeping you safe? It's huge. So there we go. That's how the front of the Wall Street Journal is describing this morning. Covert Taliban agents hastened the takeover. I read a very funny thing on Twitter this morning. I mean, it's not funny, actually. It's not funny at all, but I'm going to repeat it. It was probably some right-wing trope, but it basically said, only the Taliban are building back better. That's what it said. And I was like, why am I laughing at this? But I thought it was quite funny. It was quite well observed. Only the Taliban are building back better. I don't agree with it. It's not true, but it made me laugh. It's made Carla laugh as well. Have you got a cold this morning? You're blowing your nose. Is it freezing in England? Oh, it's freezing in England. Well, I'm so sorry that it's so cold. Yeah, 36 degrees it says here in England. Wow. Well, in Los Angeles right now, it's 69 degrees and sunny, and it's only 9:34 in the morning. The high today is going to be 78 degrees. Now, I'm going to Cleveland. Let me just check what it's doing in Cleveland, because I am worried that it's going to be snowing there. 38 degrees, cloudy, 30% chance of snow tomorrow. I've taken my North Face jacket. I've only ever worn this jacket once, and that was when I went to Yosemite National Park in the snow. This huge keep you warm coat. Taking that with me. I mean, it's very interesting, isn't it? That, you know, the climate is changing, but at the same time, we're dealing with we're dealing with a kind of level of coronavirus that is potentially going to benefit from the cold weather, right? Because isn't the cold weather going to be more helpful for preventing the spread of infection? No, it's not true. Cold weather can kill the virus, but more people go indoors when there's cold weather. And being indoors means a greater spread. So we worry about COVID in the summer because the heat can potentially cause a problem, but the cold is also a problem because people go indoors, so you can't really win. We have to think about this stuff very seriously. It's everywhere. It's indoors, it's outdoors. Okay, let me go back to the paper. Let's have a little look here. Do I think the worst of it is over, Carla, or do you think the people think the worst of it? I mean, I personally think that it's not over and it's not going to be over for a long time. I don't think that COVID will be over until, let me see if I can remember the statistic. Till 6.8 billion people are vaccinated. I think that's the statistic off the top of my head. How many people there are on the planet? Let me ask Siri. How many people on the Earth? $7.8, and I said 6.8. I was so close. 7.8 billion people need to be vaccinated. There's only 6% of people vaccinated in Africa. 6%. Here in California, like 63%. I've had 2 doses. And this is the problem of having Donald Trump as the president when this thing started, is that he politicized it. Because it was an election year. And he didn't want to lose because he loves to win. So he basically pretended that coronavirus was nothing. Oh, it's nothing. He said, in a couple of days, it'll be gone. It'll disappear. He said, as if by magic. Meanwhile, there's 800,000 people dead directly because of coronavirus in the US. And those are only the people that they've counted as being official coronavirus. There could be more. And then the same thing happened in England. You know, Boris Johnson, who still refuses to wear a mask. Even at COP26 2 weeks ago, he didn't wear a mask. Everybody else was wearing a mask. Not Boris Johnson. Dipstick. He went into hospitals shaking the hands of doctors and nurses who had cured, well, not cured, but who were looking after people with coronavirus very early on in the pandemic, around March, April time last year. And he didn't wear a mask and he didn't wear gloves. And a month later, he was in hospital himself with coronavirus in intensive care, and it got very serious. Obviously, they lied about how serious it was because they didn't want anybody to worry about him. But the reality was he was on oxygen and he was really unwell. And this has all come out since, you know. And you would have thought now, Boris Johnson, he's got like 27 kids. You would have thought that he might have learned the lesson of actually having COVID-19 and recognizing that it's like a serious thing. In England, you know, I have family in London. There's people just aren't wearing masks. People are just going about their business like it's completely normal. I mean, I wear a mask out in the street, walking in the street. Because you see, here's the thing, and we need to talk about this. It's very important. How do you show that you are a willing participant in the protection and prevention of coronavirus if you don't wear a mask? It's a symbol. It's a symbol of your desire to get this thing over and done with. Collective responsibility. And I was talking to somebody yesterday who said, what's the point in having to put a mask on to go into a restaurant, only to sit at the table and take the mask off? And I said the following. By having a mask mandate in a restaurant, it separates the people who believe in coronavirus and are prepared to protect themselves and others from the antivirus people who you do not want in the restaurant because they're higher risk. So by putting a mask mandate at the door, you're basically preventing anybody from coming in who's like one of those, oh, I'm not wearing a mask, I don't believe in coronavirus, I'm not getting vaccinated. Stops those people from coming in. You want to go in the restaurant? You've got to be somebody who is mentally on the right side of this virus. Not just politically, mentally. It's not like the science doesn't exist. Like, you can log on and look at any scientific document and see what the truth is. You don't have to watch it on your favorite comedy news channel. So the chances are, in the restaurant that I was in, the majority of the people that were in there were respectful, mask-wearing, vaccinated people because there was a mask mandate at the door, even though not at the table. And that's what we have to understand about this virus, that it's not all about science. It's not like, oh yeah, if you wear a mask at the door, that's going to stop you getting coronavirus. No, it goes deeper than that. It's about people's allegiances and people's respect for their other people and the wider community. This is why we have to think about it on multiple levels. I do worry, genuinely, I do worry that we are living in a world now that is not going to handle anything that comes again like this very well. And even though pandemic response will hopefully be better next time because we've learned a lesson from this one, I just think there are too many people now who have been swayed and distracted by the lies and the propaganda, and they think they know more than science. And you could argue that social media, especially Facebook, has a huge role to play in this, because my racist landlord is getting the majority of his stuff from Facebook. And so he can't differentiate the difference between true and false. And don't forget that they have this phrase, MSM. Have you ever heard people, conspiracists, refer to MSM? All the time. The MSM, the MSM, the MSM. And I didn't know what it was. I thought it was something to do with Bill Gates and Microsoft. It stands for mainstream media. They refer to the mainstream media in an abbreviation to mean the MSM. And so they are critical of the MSM because they think the MSM is lying to them. Because they've been told by Fox, who is also MSM, that the other channels are the MSM. But actually Fox is the MSM because more people watch Fox than any other network in America. You go into a hotel, Fox will be playing on the screen. You check into your room, Fox will be playing on the screen. You go into a gymnasium, Fox will be playing on the screen. The mainstream media is Fox that is telling you that MSM is the enemy. They know something that we don't, or we know something that they don't. And I'm like, wow, how did that even happen? Because the mainstream media isn't a thing. The mainstream media is a collection of journalists who are trying to do their job, report the truth. That's all they care to do. Unless you work for a political news channel, like Fox or OANN or Newsmax. These are political news channels. CNN is an overly dramatic news channel. It dramatizes the truth. So it tells the truth, but it dramatizes it. And it's the same with MSNBC. It's the truth, but they dramatize it. So where do you go? And, legacy networks like in England, the BBC, or in America, CBS, or ABC, or NBC, these legacy networks, no one's watching those anymore. Who watches CBS News these days? So cable news has become the prominent, digestible news because it's not presented as news. It's presented as very entertaining stuff. I call it infotainment. And it's a mess. And in England, there's a conspiracy against the BBC. They think the BBC is biased. Well, I worked for the BBC for years. And I'm telling you, the BBC doesn't have a bias. Because the BBC's bias changes All the time. One minute they're criticizing that the BBC is supporting the left, and the next minute they're like it's supporting the right and the Prime Minister. So, you have to understand that a bias from a network doesn't necessarily come from the top. It can also come from the journalists who work there, just in their day-to-day job. This is Backchannel. It's 14 minutes to 10. I'm Anthony Davis. It's the Anthony Davis Show. And if you'd like to join me, you can talk to your device. Just say your wake-up word, followed by say, followed by your message. You can also type on backchannel.tv. That's our web chat facility if you want to message the show. And if you're watching this on not on FaceSpace, on YouTube, then YouTube has a live stream. Just search Backchannel Anthony Davis, and you'll find it there. This is wonderful, isn't it? We've got into our stride, you and I. Or you, and when I say you and I basically mean just me and Thomas and Carla. We've basically got into our stride. Let's go back to the morning papers because we've got a couple left. Let's see what they're telling us this morning. Yes. Let's have a little look here. Wall Street Journal. Let's just jump to the New York Times first. Let me see if I can get the right one from today. Monday, November 29. Look at that. I found it. It says here, Biden explores talks as China builds arsenal. Up the arsenal. Yes, China in London, that story would take on a whole new meaning. But not here. It says the United States has no nuclear hotline to Beijing. Two countries never had an in-depth, serious conversation about American missile defenses in the Pacific or China's experiments to blind US satellites in time of conflict. And Chinese officials have consistently rejected the idea of entering arms-control talks, shutting down such suggestions by noting accurately that the United States and Russia each have deployed 5 times more nuclear warheads than Beijing possesses. President Biden is seeking to change all that. It says, for the first time, the United States is trying to nudge China's leadership into a conversation about its nuclear capability. US officials describing the American strategy say Mr. Biden and his top aides plan to move slowly, focusing the talks first on avoiding accidental conflict, then on each country's nuclear strategy and the related instability that could come from attacks in cyberspace and outer space. Interesting. So that's Biden taking on China. I'm worried I'm going to sneeze. I might not, but I might. You never know. It would be a first. Hang on. Here it comes. I managed to mute myself just in time because I'm a professional muter. I have been muting myself for years. I can mute myself with this button. Now I'm unmuted. I'm learning. M mutes. Is it like that on Zoom as well? Can you mute on Zoom with the M button? I guess you can. They should have a button like if you press S because you're about to sneeze, that should also mute you. You know, sneeze. And then there should be one that has for F as well. It's 11 minutes to 10. This is Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. Good morning. Racing to assess how shots work versus new variant. This also on the front of the New York Times, as nations severed air links from southern Africa amid fears of another global surge of the coronavirus. Scientists scrambled on Sunday to gather data on the new Omicron variant, its capabilities, and perhaps most important, how effectively the current vaccines will protect against it. The early findings are a mixed picture. The variant may be more transmissible and better able to evade the body's immune response, both to vaccination and to natural infection, than prior versions of the virus, experts said in interviews. So we'll talk about Omicron a little bit later in a bit more detail. That's all to come here on The Big Show on this Monday morning. When US builds big, costs and timelines swell. It says as Honolulu sprawled into new suburbs west of Pearl Harbor over the last 2 decades, city planners proposed an ambitious rail transit line that would sweep riders 20 miles into downtown. The $4 billion estimate in 2006 was hardly cheap, amounting to $200 million per mile. The cost escalation since then has been an engineering marvel all of its own. Concerns over native Hawaiian burial grounds stalled early construction, then problems with welding and cracks in the tracks appeared, and earlier this year engineers realized that in some sections the wheels were a half-inch narrower than the rails. Or order new wheels, tear up the tracks. Oh man. This is crazy. This is a $4 billion transit project that's risen to $11 billion in Honolulu. Because the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. $11 billion. Literally could have, cured world hunger. Or paid for the London Olympics. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me, does it? That they say there's no money for one thing, and yet there's endless amounts of money for other things. And this is why, because, I've always been not anti-space exploration, but anti the huge cost of space exploration. And I'm always like, why are you bothering with up there if we haven't sorted out what's going on down here? And the argument is that it's different budgets. It's different budgets. That we can find money for some things. I mean, look at the military. 2/3 of the US budget is spent on the military. I wouldn't mind, but we're not even at war with anybody anymore. We lost all the wars. We've now retreated. Taken everybody out of Afghanistan. We're retreating, and yet we spend 2/3 of the national budget on the military. Looking after the military, feeding the military, housing the military, training the military. It's a socialist program, incidentally. Just be aware of that. Socialist construct, the idea of paying 1/3 of your workforce to work. The government paying for it. It's clever. Which is why I'm a proponent of UBI, Universal Basic Income, which means that not just the military are paid by the government, but the whole country is paid by the government, where you're effectively paid to live. The project in Honolulu, just going back to the $11.4 billion that they've spent, it's also 11 years late, so it's another billion for every year it's been delayed. As the nation sets out a national spending spree fueled by the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill signed by President Joe Biden this month, the job ahead carries enormous risks that projects will face the same kind of cost, schedule, and technical problems that have hobbled ambitious efforts from New York to Seattle, delaying benefits to the public and driving up the price tag that taxpayers ultimately will bear. Have you ever looked at the US debt clock? Do you know about this? Carla, do you know about this? If you go to the website is usdebtclock.org. If you click on usdebtclock.org, it's the most fascinating website. It basically in real time counts the national debt, which is currently $28.9 trillion. And it also then looks at US federal tax revenue, the money that's coming in. Carla can't believe this. It's a very interesting website because the numbers are counting up as we go. And you can basically see, she can't believe it. It's true. Federal spending, US federal spending is at $6 trillion. The budget deficit is $2.8 trillion. The debt per citizen in the United States, bearing in mind there is 361 million people in the US, $87,000 per individual. Now, if you take taxpayers, because of course more than half of people in the US don't pay tax because they're children or because, if you reduce that to just taxpayers, the average taxpayer's debt is $229,000 based on the US national debt of $28 trillion. So, like, Build Back Better, the $1 trillion infrastructure bill, is a drop in the ocean compared to the US national debt. And who do you think is funding the US national debt? Who do you think is actually allowing these debts to pile high? Where do you think we borrow the money from? Where do we borrow the money from? Any idea? China, Russia, these superpowers that also have the kind of economy that enables them to bail out other economies. I mean, the whole thing is like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. So if you want to have a look at it, I do recommend it. The website is usdebtclock.org. I've looked at it for years. It's just something I find interesting as a kind of reminder of the fact that we are living in a world that is completely upside down financially, economically. And to say we can't afford anything is true because there's so much debt that we're just like living in a world of debt. And this is why, sorry, I'm just rearranging this chair because it's being a bit uncomfortable this morning. It's like, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like nothing is real because everything is debt. So when we talk about America being the richest country in the world, it also has a $28.9 trillion national debt that it's trying to pay down. So does that make it rich? I'm sure there are some developing nations that do not have the level of debt. Or even, let's say, European nations like Sweden, which is a very well-run country. I'd love to know what the national debt is in Sweden. I'm going to have a look. Swedish national debt. Let's see what the difference is. Oh, 35% of GDP. Oh, saying that, here we go. Here's an article. It says the IMF calculates the Kingdom of Sweden's gross national debt at 41%, but its net debt as 41.9%. Previously, the Swedish government reported a lower GDP to debt ratio than the IMF. Yeah, I guess that, it's become a very wealthy country. I'm just looking. Germany, 59% of GDP. Austria, 70% of GDP. Netherlands has a very low GDP debt compared to GDP by comparison. Sweden's only got 10 million people in it, of course, compared with 361 million here. I mean, you know how you think about your own debt, whether it's a car loan or credit card bills or those kind of debts. Do you think of those in the same vein as a whole country having debt? So apparently Japan has the most debt. Japan has the most debt, followed by Greece, Portugal, Italy, Bhutan, Cyprus, Belgium, then the United States, then Spain, then Singapore. So the US is 8th. Japan has the most debt. Theirs is 234% of its GDP, followed by Greece at 181%. This is because the stock market crashed in Japan and the government bailed out the banks and insurance companies, provided them with low-interest credit, and banking institutions had to be consolidated and nationalized after a period of time, and other fiscal stimulus initiatives were used to help reboot the economy. Unfortunately, all of those actions caused the debt level to skyrocket. It's very interesting, isn't it? I mean, China's national debt is 54% of its GDP. That's considered to be relatively low. Russia's is actually one of the lowest in the world at 19% of its GDP. Russia is the 9th least indebted country in the world. Canada's is pretty high, 83% of its GDP. Germany's 59%. It's very interesting to me. I'm kind of amazed at some of these figures. But yeah, Japan is highest. Venezuela, Sudan, Greece, Lebanon, Italy, Eritrea, Cape Verde, Mozambique, Portugal, and then Singapore and the United States. England, where's England? Where's England? I'm just checking. Not even close. No. England, this is incredible. I would have thought England would be really high on this list. But why doesn't it even feature? Have I missed it? Yeah, I mean, England's GDP must be low. Ireland's is 62%. Doesn't say. Fascinating to me. England's national debt compared to the rest of the country, I guess it's split up. You don't really look at the UK, you would look at England versus Scotland. England national debt, I'm looking it up. This is a live lookup. This is an exclusive live lookup. Oh wow, 15% of GDP. That's why England is such a great place to invest. Because its debt is so low. 15%. That is very interesting to me. Oh no, hang on a second, that's not true. It's 103%. It's 103%. Wow. I'm fascinated about this. I find it, I don't know, I find it very interesting that a lot of this debt is funded by Chinese bonds and, gilts and these interests, overseas investors owning about a quarter of all of these UK gilts and bonds. And invariably it's Chinese money, because of course China is one of the few countries left on this planet that still got any money. I sometimes wish they would just draw a line over the whole economy, world economy. The World Bank goes, okay, we are from this point onwards wiping all debt. So all developing nations that have racked up all this debt and are indebted to all these other countries would effectively on a certain day wipe all their debt clean. Because if money is fake, if it's made up, because it is, it's not a real thing. There is no such thing as money. It's just numbers on the screen. It's just a chit, your signature, a promise to pay the bearer. That's what it says on a check. I promise to pay the bearer. It's just a promise. Money is a promise. Money doesn't exist. So if you have savings in the bank and you move money from that account to that account, the actual money isn't moving. It's debt. They're moving the debt from that bank to that bank. Because if we all went to the bank at the same time to take our money out of the bank, it wouldn't be there. Because the money that we have in the bank is not there. It's not real. It is just a promise. It's just a loan. We are loaning the bank $5,000. They promise to pay it back. That's what happens when you put your money in the bank. They spent your money the day you put it in the bank. They spent your money on somebody else's debt. So all banks are doing is promising to give you back some money. And I think people forget this, Unless you actually have cash under the mattress, your money doesn't exist. It's just a promise. I think the word is chit, C-H-I-T. It's just a chit. And this goes back to the very early days of the grain producers and farmers holding on to bales of hay and a promise to return them. This is how the money supply was invented. It's very interesting to me that we're living in a world where money is just dead and it's all fake. It's all fake. And it lulls us into a false sense of security. But in reality, we just don't have the money. We don't have it. This is why when there was a rush on banks, do you remember when the pandemic first started? Or in, let's say, war-torn places like Afghanistan, when the Taliban had to take over, everyone goes to the bank to withdraw their money. They're like, get the money out the banks, because the system could crash and no one's going to bail it out. So everyone takes their money out. If you and I and everybody went to the bank and took their money out on the same day, it wouldn't be possible. The money is not there for us all to take out. It's all just debt. So the banks rely on the fact that you're going to leave your money in the account, and that's how they're able to lend it to other people. So when someone takes out a mortgage from a bank, that mortgage money is your savings. Here's a simple analogy, like how to understand this. It's a bit like a gym, right? When you sign up for your membership of the gym, they are relying on the fact that you're not going to go very often, because they don't have enough equipment for all of their members. If a gymnasium's got 3,000 members, there's not 3,000 rowing machines. There's 4 rowing machines. There's not 3,000 running machines, there's 6 running machines. They do not provide the equipment for everybody who's a member. They just don't. They rely on the fact that you're not going to come. Hi, John. John Mitchell. Nice to know you're part of the stream this morning. Thank you for joining Backchannel. Is that the John Mitchell that I know? I mean, I do know a John Mitchell who's currently in Essex in the UK. Is that you? I really hope so. And I'm very thrilled that you're here. But it might be another one because it's quite a common name. The gymnasium analogy is a very similar concept to economics. If everybody who was a member of the gym went to the gym at the same time, they wouldn't be able to get the service that they paid for, because there's just not enough room. You couldn't even put all the members of the gym into the gym. They wouldn't fit. They want you to pay every month so that you don't go, or you go once a week or twice a week for half an hour or an hour. That's what they want. And I'm an ideal gym member because I don't go. I just like telling people I've got a gym membership. I mean, I used to choose a gym based on how good its cafeteria was. If it served cheesecake and had good coffee, I'd be like, I'm joining that gym. Have you seen the restaurant? It's fantastic. And this is the reality of modern economics. It's based on the gymnasium system. You can't have your money even if you wanted it, because it's already been lent to somebody else. Someone else is already on the running machine. Someone else is already on the rowing machine. So when there's a rush on banks and people rush to take their money out, it ain't there. And this happened in 2008 when there was the subprime mortgage crash. Do you remember? In the US, where all this over-leveraging and lending and meant that the banks needed bailing out. They needed bailing out because they didn't have the money, because they'd lent so much money. They didn't have the money to give people. So who bailed them out? Taxpayers. Not the government. The government hasn't bailed out a single bank in history. It's taxpayers. It's you and me who bail out banks. And what do we get for it? Nothing. I mean, in England, banking is free. I don't know if you're aware of this. In England, you open a bank account and you can bank for free. You want to send a direct deposit or pay a bill, it's free. Not in America. In America, not only do you have to pay to have a bank account, like a monthly amount, but you also get charged for every transaction. So if you want to send a direct deposit, you want to transfer a backs payment to somebody, that's $25. It should be free. Because the banks are sitting on your money, but it's just normal in America to know that the bank costs money, because that's the capitalist system that operates here. So it's normalized. But of course banking should be free. We're basically giving banks all of our money in our trust to enable them to make a profit. They make huge profits. This is Backchannel. It's 11 minutes after 10. I'm getting a little excited and anxious because I will be leaving to go on an aeroplane shortly. And I haven't flown on a plane for over 2 years. Since November 2019 was the last time I took a flight. I have not got a book. No, I don't read books. I would love to take a book and read a book, but I just can't. I can't read on airplanes. I've got my iPad. I'll take my iPad and I'll have no internet connection, so that won't be helpful either. But maybe I'll take a book. Yeah, I'm going to take a book. I love reading. I'm going to take a book. Thanks, Carla, for reminding me to take a book. It's a very good idea. Let's go to the Arizona Daily Star, because there's a very interesting article on the front of it that Carla is very keen for me to read. And they lead with more Omicron cases pop up. WHO opposes travel ban. Is that the one you wanted me to read, or was it the abortion story? Neither. Oh, the communism story. Yes, of course. All right, let's do that first. Because time is ticking on. It says here, this is a story that comes out of Phoenix, Arizona. A first-term Arizona lawmaker wants to require that students have to study what he says is the brutality of communism before they can graduate. Representative Quang Nugent of Prescott Valley is a Republican. He said many Americans do not understand and seem to fear the idea. We always think that, well, the United States maybe can do communism better than most people, he said. He said, it's not true. I lived it. I was shot at as a child. When you think about it, who would ever shoot a child on purpose? And the result is that communists and communists, with a capital C, are not condemned. He says, consider that the Communist Party USA even felt comfortable putting out a statement after Kyle Rittenhouse was found not guilty in the Wisconsin shootings, calling the verdict racist and unjust. When you see that kind of language reaching into our society, he said, it makes me more motivated to introduce legislation to make sure that we hear the truth of communism playing around quite a bit. But the measure is likely to face opposition from Senator Paul Boyer. It's not a feeling of his feelings about communism, or for that matter, any economic political system. What it is, Boyer said, is whether state lawmakers should be dabbling in curriculum. He said we have an entity that is responsible for that, which is the State Board of Education. In fact, Boyer said the board adopted new social study standards just 4 years ago. They like for them to be in place for 10 years or so because, as you can imagine, it's a very lengthy process to amend them, said Boyer, who chairs the Senate Education Committee. Yeah. I don't know how I feel about this. I mean, let me give you an example. Communism is used to scare people in the United States, right? It's used to scare people. Now, communism is how do I describe this? Here's Bernie Sanders, right, trying to get the nomination to be the Democratic candidate for U.S. president 2 years ago. And the right wing called him a radical socialist and a communist. Now, Bernie Sanders is not a radical socialist in any way, shape, or form. Radical socialism is not what Bernie Sanders advocates for. He advocates for free healthcare for all. Well, that's not radical socialism. That's just normal where I come from. And we have a conservative government where I come from, and we still have socialized medicine, free healthcare. Our tax is a little bit higher than in the US to cover the cost of it, but you wouldn't notice the difference. Americans pay far more for health than we do in England. And the other thing that people forget is that in England you have the choice to have private healthcare if you want it, and it's not very expensive. So why do we use communism as a scare tactic to make people vote Republican? when Republicans have not offered anything. They have no policies for stuff like healthcare. In fact, if anything, they want to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, which would remove healthcare for 45 million people. I mean, social media now is radicalizing people on both sides. Because, I mean, I don't know where I consider myself. I've never really thought about where I consider myself. I tend to be, I don't get to vote in the United States, so I don't consider myself a voter, typical voter. But I am conscious of the fact that there are an increasing number of young people being pushed towards more of a European attitude to politics. And that invariably is quite leftist. But I wouldn't call it radical, because I think that radical leftism is counterbalanced by the extreme right. So that the right is so far right now in the West that anything that's considered left of center, the right wing would call radical, but it just isn't. Advocating for, gun control is not radical. It's normal. Advocating for free healthcare is not radical. It's normal. It's going to save Republicans money. Save poor people money. I mean that you don't save your life savings paying for insulin, which the wholesale price of a vial of insulin in America is $95 or $98. Well, in the UK, the wholesale price of a vial of insulin is £7.50, about $10. So it costs 10 times more to get a vial of insulin in America than it does in Europe because of profit. Are you happy about that? Not if you're a diabetic. So this is the point that I make, and this is why we have to be very conscious of what's happening here. We are living in a world now where the truth is irrelevant, common sense is irrelevant, the barometer of normal has shifted to extremes. And there used to be a time when you'd be able to be like, well, yeah, that just doesn't make sense. And people are not doing now. People are going, oh, really? Really? What happened to our God-given ability to be balanced and thoughtful about others and having situational awareness for politics and for also telling the difference between lies and truth? And when Kellyanne Conway talked about alternative facts, when she was being grilled by CNN that time, I think it was Chuck, what's his name? No one should be called Chuck. Not these days. It made me feel really quite sad because I was like, wow, the barometer for normalcy, for normality, is now an irrelevant part of this story. Chuck Todd. Chuck Todd. Carla and I got it at the same time. So how do you qualify what is radical? Because, if you are... I fell out with one of my best friends in England because I told him that he'd been radicalized because he told me that he didn't believe in the pandemic and he thought the whole thing was a government conspiracy. And I said to him, you've been radicalized. And he fell out with me over that comment. He really didn't want to be called radicalized. To him, that was a step too far. But he's not on his own. I'd say that 50% of people have now been radicalized. And so how is this thinking in America that the left is demonic and the right is pure, how is that different to Nazism? How is that different to the Taliban and their thinking, where they radicalize their people to think that the Taliban are normal, what is considered to be, an excellent leadership? How do we How do we stop ourselves from normalizing extremism? Because, look at the Carl Rittenhouse murder trial. He has gone and executed 2 people in cold blood. And no one is talking about him as anything other than a hero and a free man. And on the right, he's been held up as this poster child for the right, that you can basically get away with killing 2 people in cold blood and not facing any consequences for that, and celebrating them. And so what is that? That's radicalization. That's extremism. That's Nazism. In the same way that the Nazis celebrated the execution of 6 million Jews, that was Nazism. That's how it is. When you celebrate death, when you can take people's lives without consequence, and your orbit of leadership thinks that's okay, that's Nazism. What was the first thing that happened when Rittenhouse got off? Donald Trump announced, "Congratulations, Carl Rittenhouse. Congratulations." There was no question that he executed 2 people. That was not in question. It was whether or not he was doing it in self-defense. Well, I personally don't believe he was self-defending. He had a bigger gun than the guy that pointed a little handgun at him, and he was bigger than the other guy. And earlier, I think the day before, there's video footage of Carl Rittenhouse beating the crap out of a girl on the street. Beating her up with his bare fists. And then later that day, posing with Proud Boys, radicalized extremists, Nazis. Proud Boys, Nazis, same thing. Carl Rittenhouse being photographed doing the white power sign and posing with these guys and smiling with his AR-15 semi-automatic weapon. This is the evidence that was inadmissible because they were like, well, that's not the case here. The case is self-defense. Just focus on the self-defense case. Just focus on the fact that did someone point a gun at Carl Rittenhouse and therefore he had a right to defend himself. Trust me, if Carl Rittenhouse had turned around and run away, he wouldn't have been shot at. In fact, he wasn't shot. No one shot at Carl Rittenhouse. Nobody shot at him. If somebody had shot at him, then maybe he had a right to shoot back. But nobody shot at him. He had a bigger gun and he was a bigger guy. So what we're doing now is we are celebrating this new normal. The new normal, where it's okay to go and kill people in the street and be celebrated by your supreme leader. All the Republican lawmakers were celebrating his win. A win! You killed 2 BLM protesters, therefore it's a win. This is the so-called civilized world that we're living in now. So-called civilized. I want to read a little excerpt from a journalist that I am very fond of his writing. His name's Umair Haque. And he actually dropped an essay this morning that he wrote. And he writes essays a couple of times a week. And he wrote a story this morning called "Why Didn't America Become Part of the Modern World?" And I just want to read you a few sentences. He said, "When I say the modern world, what do you think of? Probably a great city somewhere with broad avenues, spacious parks, art and culture, old museums, people buzzing about, public transport thrumming. Now think of America," he says. He lives in America, by the way. "People die for a lack of insulin. Young people who can't afford to start families of their own. The average person living perched right at the edge of ruin. One missed paycheck, one illness, one emergency away from disaster. An endless and gruesome list of stuff that puts the Dark Ages to shame." Umair says, "Here's what I think. America never joined the modern world. It's the modern world's first failed state, he says. It became something like a weird, bizarre dystopia, replete with falling life expectancy, hand-to-mouth living, relentless and legendary cruelty, instead of a truly modern society instead. But why? He says the creation of modernity, as intellectuals sometimes call it, was one of history's greatest accomplishments. But what does it mean to be modern? He said, I don't think that we need grand, abstruse theories to really get it. He says, I think it hinges on one simple, crucial, and deceptively beautiful insight. Poverty unleashes animal spirits in human beings, which lead to ruin and catastrophe and war. He says that's the essence of modernity. And this is very interesting to me, is that the modern world here in America and other places around the world, they see... Okay, well, I'll read the line about poverty again, because I want this to be clear. He says, poverty unleashes animal spirits in human beings. And by animal spirits, we're talking about, killing people and getting away with it. Or, fighting for the last toilet roll on the shelf. He says, poverty unleashes animal spirits in human beings, which lead to ruin, catastrophe, and war. He says, well, that's simple. But the truth of it is anything but. For millennia, human beings didn't understand. So the world was run by a long succession of feudal and tribal systems. Poverty was enforced, created, and managed. Some people were peasants and serfs, others still were slaves. And atop them sat a tiny number of nobles, or owners, or kings. And what was the result of this model of social order? He says it was endless war. Societies had to compete for land, for resources, which mostly meant new slaves and peasants. But why? The vast majority of people being poor couldn't create much. They couldn't, for example, build great hospitals, discover antibiotics, and then pioneer healthcare systems. They were just peasants. And when the peasants grew angry, the nobles had two choices: revolution or war. And usually, war was easier than fighting off a revolution. So centuries of endless, bitter wars. And while the war went precisely nowhere in terms of how well people lived, until the Industrial Revolution. And I actually think that the point he's making here is this. If you go back to the US Constitution and look at the earliest writings of the founders, talking about protecting the rich from the poor, talking about, land, because of course land is really, territory is where it all hinges. The writing in the Constitution basically says, how do we stop the poor from land grabbing from the rich? Because of course the Constitution was written by the rich to protect the rich from the poor. And that hasn't changed. It's still the same now. So that's kind of the world that we're living in. We're living in a world that is controlled and still managed by the wealthy. Hi, Bob. Thanks for joining us. And when we reference the Constitution all the time, whether it be for, our rights, our freedom, our liberty, our right to bear arms, or whatever it is, we also have to recognize that that document was designed to protect the very wealthy from revolution, from an uprising. And Umair says that after World War II, human beings learned a great lesson. Germany, driven to poverty by war reparations, had turned to fascism. Finally, a set of great minds made the link: poverty, ruin, extremism, fundamentalism, fascism, authoritarianism, war. All the gravest ills we know of, all the diseases of the body, politic, caused by poverty, which is the deprivation of possibility. And I've said this from the very beginning, is that the reason we have division in America and throughout the world is because wages have not kept up with inflation. People are poor. In England, when I was a kid, let's say 35 years ago, people were making, a good wage was like £50 a day. Guess what? it's still £50 a day. The average wage in the UK is around £25,000 a year. You know? People still working on building sites for 50 quid or 60 quid or 70 quid. If it had kept up with inflation, instead of the national average wage being around 25,000 across the UK, in London it's around 32,000. But if the average wage had kept up with inflation, it would be 10 times that. So the average wage in the UK would be £250,000 a year. That's how much money you really need to live in the UK, is £250,000 a year. But people live on poverty wages and they've learned to normalize it. And for the people who are living on the breadline, and of course we have more people in relative poverty than ever before. In England, it's about 30% of the population live in poverty. They invariably are the ones who then seek out extremist views and radicalized leadership. And that's why I never understood why, the poorest people in America were voting for Donald Trump. They're voting for the wrong guy. They're voting for the wrong candidate. He's not going to get you out of poverty. He's one of the rich people who wrote the Constitution. He's one of the people that wanted to protect himself as a landowner from the peasants. If you voted for the other people, then you get social programs and you get welfare and you get free healthcare and you get all of these constructs that are designed to help the poorest people. But politics gets in the way of this. And so you end up voting, the poorest people tend to vote for the right wing because they look for someone to blame. And in Nazi Germany, they understood too that poverty isn't just financial, but it can also be deprivation of social bonds, of opportunities, of meaning, of status, of purpose. There's many kinds of poverty, but money is obviously the main one. So I just find it very interesting that we are living in a world now where the poorest people are voting for the wrong party in terms of getting help. And the wealthy continue to control the land and the media and the produce and the debt. Nothing really changes. And so to take it back to this article that we were looking at earlier about this Arizona rep wanting communism taught, there are huge lessons we can learn from communism. There are huge lessons that we should remind ourselves of to know that extreme versions of politics are unhealthy. The far right is unhealthy, but the far left is also unhealthy. And that there should be a kind of moderate normality that enables society to evolve normally without too much conflict. This is Backchannel. It's the 29th of November. It's 10:34 here on the West Coast. It's 1:34 on the East Coast, and thank you for joining us. Bob, John, nice to know you're hanging out this morning. If you're listening on YouTube or watching on YouTube, you can message there. You can also message on our chat facility, which is at backchannel.tv. Okay, let's just go back to Omicron because, I did promise we were going to talk about that. Maybe we should look at that in this last few minutes. The headline on the front of the Arizona Daily Star is "More Omicron cases pop up. WHO opposes travel bans." Yes, this is in the Netherlands, The Hague. Cases of the Omicron variant of the coronavirus popped up in countries on opposite sides of the world on Sunday, and many governments rushed to close their borders, even as scientists cautioned that it's not clear if the new variant is more alarming than other versions of the virus. Yes, I talked about this on 5 Minute News, which is my other news program that I do. It's like there was a doctor in South Africa who was one of the first to discover this, and she said that the patients that were presenting with this weren't presenting with more extreme symptoms. They were just presenting with the same symptoms. Actually, they didn't have loss of taste or smell. And then when they looked at the spike protein in the lab, they saw that it was different and it behaved differently. And that's when they alerted the World Health Authorities. Because it's different. And as we know with coronavirus, it's Russian roulette. You don't know what you're going to get. It's still not known much. We still don't know much about it, including whether it's more contagious, more likely to cause serious illness, or more able to evade the protection of vaccines. But many countries rushed to act, reflecting anxiety about anything that could prolong the pandemic that has killed more than 5 million people. Israel decided to bar entry to foreigners, and Morocco said it would suspend all incoming flights for 2 weeks starting Monday. Among the most drastic of a growing raft of travel curbs being imposed by nations around the world as they scrambled to slow the variant spread. Scientists in several places from Hong Kong to Europe have confirmed its presence. The Netherlands reported 13 Omicron cases on Sunday, and both Canada and Australia each found 2. I mean, here in the US, I'm hoping they don't close the border, as I said earlier. But Dr. Francis Collins, director of the National Institutes of Health in the US, emphasized there's no data yet that suggests the new variant causes more serious illness than previous COVID-19 variants. I do think it's more contagious when you look at how rapidly it's spread through multiple districts like South Africa. It has the earmarks, therefore, of being particularly likely to spread from one person to another. What we don't know is whether it can compete with Delta, he said. He echoed several experts in saying the news should make everyone redouble their efforts to use the tools the world already has, including vaccinations, booster shots, and measures such as mask wearing. I know, America, you're really tired about hearing those things, but the virus is not tired of us, he said. I mean, this is my feeling, and people seem to ask me because my friends think I'm the font of all knowledge, and if only they knew the truth. But people ask me, what do you think this is going to be and how long do you think it's going to last? And I'm just like, the pandemic is never going away. I mean, look, the AIDS epidemic hasn't gone away. They just have preventative drugs now. Right? So there is still HIV in society. It's still a thing. But the drugs, the preventative drugs for people who are sexually active and who feel they might be at risk can take preventative drugs. And the people that had HIV have now taken the drug cocktail, which has enabled them to be reborn as they were before they contracted HIV. So HIV is now not the killer that it used to be, because remember, it caused a pneumonia. So they cured it effectively. But it never went away. Measles never went away. They just invented a vaccination. Coronavirus will never go away. They just invented... Hi, Deborah, you're back. Oh, it's your pal Hal's mum. Thank you. How are things across the pond? Across the pond? What are you talking about? I'm in California. You're in New York, aren't you? I'm in California. I wish I was across the pond sometimes, but no, I'm not. I'm right here with you in the United States, where I belong. I'm fully American now. I talk about the US in terms of us. I say us. Because I've been here for 5 years. And from January will be my 6th year living in the United States. And I'm a permanent resident. I'm just here now. This is it. This is my life. It's very important to move countries. I really, really recommend it. Just move countries. At what county, Mayo? Carla says I need to start saying mayo instead of mayonnaise. I still say gymnasium instead of gym. I don't appreciate an abbreviation. I never have. I like the long-form word. I think it's respectful. Like if I meet somebody, I met Margaret recently, and she announced her name is Maggie, and I said, do you mind if I call you Margaret? And she said, well, nobody else does. And I said, what does it say on your passport? She said, Margaret. I said, I'll call you Margaret. Deborah, do you get called Debbie? I really hope not, because Debbie is really too much of an abbreviation for the kind of formalities that I'm used to. You know? You'd have to be like really best friends with someone to be called Debbie. If someone calls me Tony, they get a quick, swift slap around the face. Back of the hand. Doesn't matter who they are, male, female, adult, child. Call me Tony. Quick slap around the face. It's not fair to abbreviate somebody's name. I don't call Anthony Fauci Tony Fauci. I'm only kidding. I don't really slap children around the face. Not even my own children. It's 10:41. This is Backchannel. It's 19 minutes before 11. Your pal Hal will be here at 11. That's Deborah's son. So if you want to stick around for Deborah's son, then you're very welcome to do that. He's going to be here for 2 hours, procrastinating in the same way that I have been about the world, the state of the world, and Omicron. The Dutch Public Health Authority confirmed that 13 people who arrived from South Africa on Friday have so far tested positive for Omicron. They were among 61 people who tested positive for the virus after arriving on the last 2 flights to Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. This was before a flight ban was implemented. They were immediately put into isolation, most at a nearby hotel. So there's 2 cases in Canada. Look, here's my prediction. Omicron is already in the United States, right? They haven't banned flights. United and American Airlines are the 2 airlines that fly from Johannesburg to the US every day. Have they cancelled any flights? No. Trust me, Omicron is already here. It's just here. They just haven't found it yet. But they will, probably tomorrow. And what will they do about it? They'll probably encourage people to get their boosters. They'll encourage the people who are not vaccinated to get vaccinated. I don't think they'll close the border. They might close the border to Southern Africa, possibly. But the World Health Organization have advised against that. Oh, you're called Deborah. Thank you, Deborah. I'm very pleased you're not called Debbie. I'm not called Ant. I'm not called Tony. I'm called Anthony in America. Anthony in England. Because when I moved to America, I started pronouncing the TH because nobody knew what I was... When I said Anthony, genuinely, people didn't know. They were like, what? I went, Anthony? They're like, oh, Anthony. She says as she got older, she's called Deborah. Oh, I see. So maybe you were Debbie as a child. Were you born Debbie? I mean, my daughter's name is Edie, but we meant to call her Edith. Like, that was the whole idea. I wanted to call her Edith. Like, Edie would be her short name, her informal name that we would use day to day. But on the birth certificate, we were going to put Edith, and we forgot. So now she's Edie. Just forgot to do it. It's very difficult making a child and remembering all these things. It's very difficult. A lot can go wrong. Also on the front of the Arizona Daily Star, court set to take up abortion argument. Now, this is the big story that's going to be happening tomorrow, of course. No, actually, the day after tomorrow. It's Wednesday that it's happening. Tomorrow's Tuesday. It says both sides are telling the Supreme Court there's no middle ground in Wednesday's showdown over abortion. The justices can either reaffirm the constitutional right to an abortion or wipe it away altogether. Roe v. Wade, the landmark 1973 ruling that declared nationwide rights to abortion, is facing its most serious challenge in 30 years in front of a court with a 6-3 conservative majority that has been remade by 3 appointees of President Donald Trump. Who was the other one? I thought it was 2. I thought it was Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. Who's the third? Was it Neil Gorsuch? Was the third conservative member? I think it was Neil Gorsuch. Yeah. I think he came in right at the beginning. There are no half measures here, said Sheriff Gergis, a Notre Dame law professor who once served as a law clerk to Justice Samuel Alito. A ruling that overturned Roe in the 1992 case of Planned Parenthood versus Casey would lead to outright bans or severe restrictions on abortion in 26 states, according to the Guttmacher Institute, a research organization that supports abortion rights. The case being argued on Wednesday comes from Mississippi, where a 2018 law banned abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy, well before viability. The Supreme Court has never allowed states to ban abortion before the point at roughly 24 weeks, when a fetus can survive outside the womb. I mean, here's my view on this. It's 2021. It's nearly 2022. Roe v. Wade happened in 1973, which is the year before I was born. I cannot see how any modern society that is seeking to live in a contemporary world and be connected to the rest of the world can ban abortion, i.e. take away a woman's right to choose what she does with her own body in this day and age, in 2021. Because you're effectively winding the clock back to the 1960s when all this came to a head, and there was this sexual revolution and women's rights and all of this was like the linchpin of decision making. And finally, 1973 took that long, took at least a decade to try and campaign for women's rights. And then finally, it was allowed. So what are you going to do? You're going to wind the clock back now to 1960 because a bunch of old white men have decided that women shouldn't have the right to choose. Old white men. What the tragedy is, and if anybody talks about religion as being like the impetus behind this, it's not the case because, Christianity has been hijacked by the right wing. There's plenty of Christians who have had to walk away from the religion because of these issues, these modern issues, such as being pro-choice. It makes me sad that we're living in a society, and that's why, just going back to the article that I referenced earlier, that Umair Haq wrote, about America not being a kind of modern, civilized society anymore. The headline was, "Why didn't America become part of the modern world? The great lesson of the 20th century and how America never learned it." The article today by Umair Haq contributes to this conversation about abortion. It's basically saying the rest of the world realized that a woman has a right to choose what happens with her own body. Now, of course, there's still an upper limit on abortion, right? But here they want to prevent people from aborting a child at all. It's insane. It's just insane to me. Deborah likes the way that I decorated my telly booth. And Karen just joined us. Karen, thank you for joining the chat this morning. If you want to talk to me, you can use the web chat facility. Or if you're watching this on your Amazon Echo Show device, then just say your wake-up word followed by say and then your message. I mean, we're living in a world now that is splitting further and further. And this is and just going back to the Anthony Fauci documentary that's on National Geographic that I do recommend. It's just called Fauci. He hopes that the world will be less divided politically because future pandemics will end up going the same way as this one, where it'll be impossible to prevent disease because medicine is so political. And his prayer for future generations is that we are less divided. And I watched him say that at the age of 80 with 2 young daughters. And I thought to myself, hope springs eternal. I cannot see it happening. I fear that we will become more divided. I fear that we will become more political. I fear that we will become more extremist. And I fear that abortion will be banned in America by the Supreme Court that is packed with conservatives. I mean, Amy Coney Barrett was part of some Christian cult, widely reported. So how do we overcome this? What needs to change? What needs to happen to allow us to kind of get back to a kind of moral, civilized, modern, respectful society? What needs to change so that we don't celebrate Carl Rittenhouse for getting off, even though he quite clearly executed 2 people in the street? What do you need to do to help bring about change? Do you need to go back to be a grassroots activist? To look at local politics, to look at your environment and want to help? Because being activated is not just about putting a miserable post on Facebook or Nextdoor moaning about the state of homelessness in your street. That's not activism. To bring about change, you actually have to do something. You can create a movement. You can support a non-governmental organization. You can open a local business that supports other local suppliers. You could go and read to people. I mean, we could really take it back to its most simple. You could just go read to people. Like I shared with you an article this morning, just something that I had read that had motivated me to think more about politics, about uncivil societies in America being not as modern as maybe people think. I still choose to live here. I still rather live here than England. But maybe our politics is actually not as civilized as we thought. And when I see congressmen and women celebrating Carl Rittenhouse getting off, I recognize that we're uncivil. When I see Congress people aiding and abetting an insurrection on the US Capitol, I realize that we are uncivil. And I'm referring to people like Ted Cruz, for example. Look at what he said in the days leading up to the insurrection. So let's talk a little bit, or let's think a little bit about how we can do our little bit for change. And you don't have to be a lawmaker to change the law. You know? You just have to sway the lawmaker. You just have to present a coherent case, not yell at the moon, but actually join with your family. I mean, my parents were conservative. My dad died, but I managed to convince my mum to vote more thoughtfully by talking to her with dialogue. And last year, my mum in the British general election, for the first time in her life, did not vote Conservative because we were able to talk about the state of the world. And I'd always felt that my mum had her right to choose, but I also realized that my mum was not being exposed to the truth. My mum was not really seeing the world from a different perspective. So maybe that's all we can do, is just furnish people with a better perspective, or a more modern perspective, or a more kind perspective. That's all from me today. Thank you for joining this Backchannel experience. Tomorrow, the show will come from Cleveland, Ohio. It won't look like this. I'll be somewhere else. So wish me luck. Wish me luck. I'm going to be on a plane. I'm going to be flying with Delta Airlines via Minneapolis. I'll be there tonight. You have a great day. Your pal Hal is next on Backchannel.